And then, go ahead, Irene.
Our mission, Helping Parents Heal, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting bereaved parents. Through support and resources offered, we aspire to help individuals become shining light parents, meaning a shift from a state of emotional heaviness to one of hopefulness and greater peace of mind. Helping Parents Heal goes a step beyond other groups by allowing the open discussion of spiritual experiences and afterlife evidence in a non-dogmatic way. Helping Parents Heal affiliate groups welcome everyone regardless of religious or non-religious background and encourage open dialogue. Attendance at all Helping Parents Heal meetings is voluntary. All discussions that take place at affiliate-led meetings are confidential. We hope that participants will learn from and share with each other. Zoom meetings run by leadership are not confidential. These meetings typically feature guest presenters and are posted on YouTube so that affiliate members worldwide can watch and benefit. Neither type of Helping Parents Heal meeting is designed to replace traditional therapy or spiritual counseling. Helping Parents Heal offers a wide variety of speakers, allowing parents to learn about many possible ways to heal. This includes presenters covering progressive topics such as afterlife evidence and connecting with our children who have passed. The views expressed by our guest speakers may or may not reflect the opinions of Helping Parents Heal leaders and members, so we ask that you take from their presentations whatever may benefit you personally. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're here this evening, and thank you so much, Mark, for being here.
Yes, thank you,
Absolutely.
Mark, for being here. We're thrilled that you're here. I'm going to read a very short bio for Mark so that you know a little bit more about him. Um, and then we're going to be able to hear more about this wonderful book that has just been published. Mark says he is just an average guy whose father happened to be a deeply spiritual minister and also one of the top psychic mediums of the 20th century. Mark did very well in the business world, but forgot what was most important until his youngest son, Brandon, passed. The pain of his transition drew him back to explore his roots and to reconsider why all of us are here. He remembered how to connect and started giving the spiritual aspect of his life equal billing with the material side. In addition to his day job, Mark is also an author. He had some remarkable experiences and penned them in a book called Soul Shift, which was released on July 15th, 2008. I must say that Soul Shift was one of the books that really changed my trajectory in healing. It's an amazing book. His story shed light on evidence that physical death is not the end, and also spoke to the importance of life, of the life that we are living right now. He subsequently published a second book, Messages from the Afterlife, diving more deeply into the subject matter covered in his first book, tackling topics such as rigid skepticism and religious concerns over such matters. He was also honored to be able to publish a book written by his father, previously unreleased, which is Your Psychic Potential, A Guide to Psychic Development, which was the framework for the book that he now has just published very recently called The Persistence of the Soul. And so without further ado, I'm going to have Mark talk more about that book and just maybe talk a little bit about himself. But before you get started, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your relationship with this incredible dad who was one of the most famous psychic mediums of his time, and how you felt about that as a child growing up.
That was the short bio. I should have sent you a new one that's a little more condensed, but thank you. That kind of covered a lot of bases. Yeah, growing up with the father I had, I guess, was pretty unusual, or would seem that way to most people. And again, thanks for all of you being here. I know a lot of you, and I haven't seen you face to face for a while, so it's good to see your faces here. For those of you I haven't met, I look forward to meeting you maybe at the conference. But my dad was a pretty interesting guy. But for me, living in that household with a father who kind of knew everything that was going on was just normal for me. It wasn't any big deal. It was more, I realized it was different because of my friends would ask me questions like, oh, does your dad predict the future for you? Does he tell you things that are going to happen, and things like that. So they were all very curious. But it was a household where you just couldn't get away with a whole lot. Dad kind of kept you in check. I had an older brother who he had his somebody was buying him beer when he was underage, so the dad thwarted that with the threat of turning the guy in. And my brother liked to drag race his car, and my dad stopped that. And one of my favorite stories goes back to when my parents were first married before I was born, and she had been working on being a vegetarian for a couple of months and had been successful with that. And then one day she was just dying for a hamburger, and she went out and got one. And when she got home, she then went home, and that evening when Dad came back home, his first words to her were, "So Shirley, did you enjoy your hamburger today?" So that's the psychic side of Dad, and I saw that in many different forms, both in the household, but then in public venues, in his own church, and beyond the church, he would branch out and do TV shows, demonstrations of psychic phenomena for private groups, even nightclubs and things, because he felt like he wanted to expand people's thinking just outside of a church that a lot of people would never go to a church, to make them rethink their preconceptions about what it is to be a person. And are we just a body and a brain, or are we more than that? Are we a soul in a body having an experience? So that's why he branched out. And I would take friends to see him do his demonstration. And in the church, you'd see more of the mediumship. That would be the messages from deceased loved ones passed on to people that were there. And they were highly specific. They were detailed. They were applicable to the folks. They immediately knew who it was by sharing, maybe the occupation of the person, their name, sometimes first and last name, their favorite foods, the things they did together, all that kind of stuff. So I was always really captivated by that, even more than the psychic stuff. And then in public venues, it was more of a psychic demonstration. If you think about it, he was doing this in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Back then, there wasn't this openness to the idea of mediums and mediumship like there is today. So he was kind of ahead of the curve. But in a way, he was a pioneer too. So he opened up this portal for other folks to come through today. Some of them that may not even know who he was, that are now benefiting from him laying that groundwork. But he was on like the Merv Griffin show. He was on Dinah Shore. He was on Steve Allen. I have a clip of that one. Fortunately, people could see if they go to my website. And during those public demonstrations, not necessarily on TV, but even in public venues or nightclubs, he would pop into mediumship periodically. Like he would just have somebody pop in from the other side and share, their name and the relationship to the person who is the sitter. And I always loved that. I was just like blown away. So that really sunk in on me from the time I was a child to think, there really is more. We do go on. There is life after death. Not fully understanding how it worked, but just knowing that has to be real. It's real. And then, when my son Brandon passed, it was a great comfort to me. I mean, I still had to go through the grief process like all of us. And it still hurt like hell, but nonetheless, that was something that enabled my wife and I and our family to heal much more quickly and to be able to move forward and be constructive and eventually live a joyful life again. So that's kind of the nutshell on my dad and his life and my relationship with him. Now, my parents did divorce when I was only 11 years old or thereabouts. So after that, I didn't get to spend as much time with him as I would have liked. And even before they divorced, he was on the road a lot. He was overseas. He was in Hawaii. He was in LA. He was all over the place. So, that was tough on me as a kid growing up. And then when they were divorced, it was even less time. But I would get usually a month or two in the summer with him, and then weekends when he was around and things like that. But that's kind of the starting point. As for the book, though, just to clarify, this is the new book. We can talk about it more at the end, but this is a reissue, but it's expanded, updated, and reformatted, re-edited version of a book I released a while ago called Messages from the Afterlife. So if you've already read that book, I just want to be transparent about it, because I'm not asking you to get this one because you've read probably 80 or 90% of this book in that one, but it has been reformatted and expanded with new content too. So you may be interested in it for that reason if you haven't read that before. It goes deeper than Soul Shift did. So Soul Shift was the first one we talked about, and that was really my journey initially after Brandon's passing, and kind of reopening myself up to this field and all the evidence and everything. The new book goes on, so it's kind of an interesting divergence, because it still has the personal stories and the personal experiences that people love, but it also has more of the research, the science, and the history that's supportive of my stories. So for those of you who have skeptical husbands or people who are more analytical engineers, this book could serve you well for that purpose. So it's kind of two books in one. You can just read the personal stories, or you could just read the other information that's more of the research and science orientation. Or if you're the right type of person, you might want to read it all. So that's what the new book is about. And I thought I'd just turn it back to you, Elizabeth, in case you have other questions.
Yes, I have some really important questions. First of all, I just wanted to say that I was really fortunate to be speaking to Suzanne Wilson on an interview the other day, and I pulled out the book that you had signed for me January of 2010. Maybe you could say a little bit more about that, because it's pretty amazing. This book, Soul Shift, was truly one of the books that was the most meaningful to me in the beginning of my journey. So maybe you could tell how that
Well, this
happened.
is really how, I mean, these are like the formative stages of helping parents heal, or even before that. So my book had come out. I was doing different events to promote it. One of these events was a workshop with Jamie Clark, who's a medium friend of mine. And we were at Storm Wisdom bookstore, and we had like a private room. So we had put together a workshop, and in that workshop, I was actually teaching or sharing the information from my dad's book, Your Psychic Potential, A Guide to Psychic Development. And I put that into PowerPoint form, because really that book came from workshops he was doing in the late 60s and early 70s to teach people how to, thank you, Scalen, I just saw that. I appreciate the kind words about the new book. But he was doing these workshops to teach people how to develop their own intuition and psychic abilities and things like that. So that's where I got the material, and I was doing that. And then Jamie was talking about his process, and then he did some readings too for people. Anyhow, we're about halfway through this. We take a break, and this woman approaches me, and it's Suzanne Wilson. I never met her before. And she said she just moved to Arizona from Florida, and she came to this event because she was new there and wanted to meet like-minded people. And so we started talking about a few things. She then gave me a couple of validations of things that were kind of funny, because she said she was already a medium. And then she gave me a couple validations that showed me that she was telling the truth, and that she was. And one was kind of amusing. But anyhow, she then went on to, somehow along the way, I had mentioned that Brandon, our son, had passed on a mountain. And she had then mentioned, it's ironic about that, that your son passed on a mountain, because I just met another woman that I read for who had a son who passed on a mountain. Now, it was obviously a much bigger mountain. And so I said, you know what, why don't you give her a copy of this book, and here's my contact information, and maybe that'll be helpful to her. And so she did. And it was only a couple days later, I got a call from Elizabeth, and she said, Mark, I read your book in one sitting or something like that. I loved it, and I'd like to meet you and your wife. So we arranged that meeting. It was pretty soon thereafter, and we got together and we chatted for a little bit. And she said, I've got this group. It's a Facebook group right now, but I'm going to have my first ever in-person group meeting. And I'd like you to be my inaugural speaker if you're open to that. And I'm like, okay, sure. So, the Facebook group was called Parents United in Loss. I go to this, we have 30 or 40 people there, and I do my talk, and things went really well overall. And then Elizabeth started having monthly meetings. And then I would go to as many as I could, and I could tell it was really healing for people. And a lot of the people that are on here today went to that first meeting, or at least some of you did. I see Doris, and there's probably others I can't see right now. But and then we had this regular following, and then it would grow, and then some people would come in and they would get better, and then they'd move on because they had enough healing that they didn't need it anymore, didn't feel they needed it. So then fast forward to 2011, I was talking to Tina Powers, another good medium friend of mine from Tucson, excellent medium, great person. She's a former newscaster who had those abilities all her life, but decided to leave that world and go into doing the mediumship full time after having to cover a story about a teenager who had been shot, thinking about the impact on the father and how she didn't want to do that any longer. So anyhow, I'm talking to Tina about what I wanted to do at that point in my life, and that I was leaving this career and I was looking at what to do next, and not even thinking about this, but aside from, my career, my work stuff, she said, Mark, I think your real mission in life is to help other parents who have been through the same thing you have been through. And maybe you could think about starting an organization, to do that. And I thought, okay. So I mulled it over for just a little while. I thought, well, I don't need to reinvent the wheel. Elizabeth has a great thing going. It's just one location though, and it doesn't have a website. It doesn't have a newsletter. And again, it's just the one location. I thought, maybe we could blueprint what she does in her meetings and get other affiliates to start doing that. And I could help her put a website together, and we could formulate a newsletter. And so basically I called her and said, hey, would you like to do this and blow this thing out? And she goes, that'd be great. And I said, then how about another name like Helping Parents Heal? She goes, oh, I love that name. So that's how this thing started. So it's amazing to see what it has become in just over a decade, to where we have 165 affiliates now worldwide, 26,000 members, and a conference that draws 1,000 people. That's tremendously healing. So.
Well, and I wanted to just say, first of all, that Doris, who's on here, is the person responsible for putting together our nonprofit, which was so exciting. And we really appreciated that. She's our pro bono attorney, and she's not only a Shining Light parent, she's also a Shining Light grandparent. And we just appreciate her so much. But also, I wanted to say that all these people that you were mentioning, Suzanne Wilson is going to be a keynote speaker at our conference. Jamie and Tina are also going to be speaking at our conference. So people will be able to see them there. They've been at former or conferences that we've had in the past as well. Actually, both of them are going to be doing gallery readings at the at the conference, which will be wonderful. But I also just wanted to ask you, at that first meeting, it was very exciting, because I don't think that I've ever had this happen before, but there were people who were asking about mediums and the Bible, and if it was something that was not safe to consult with mediums. And you had some incredible answers. You're so good with knowing how to respond to those. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that meeting and how it went. It wasn't a big part of the meeting. There was only maybe 1 or 2 people who were there who are like that. But it's interesting, because we don't really come across that or have that anymore, because that was in 2010, and now we're in 2024, right?
I remember it well. I wasn't going to bring it up, but it's fine. In fact, I have a chapter in this book called Psychic Phenomena and Mediumship in Religion and History. And the reason I wrote that is because there are a lot of folks that grow up in a more traditional with a more traditional religious background, specifically more fundamentalist Christian background. And that's kind of where these folks were coming from. There were 2 of them, and they actually I felt like they infiltrated the meeting to try and, I guess, be a little preachy. So they came there and were talking about, like, well, you got to be careful with this stuff. And, basically I knew enough scripture to be able to talk in their language about their concerns. And usually I will have to admit, there are some disparaging things in the Old Testament about mediums. But you have to take into account that these books, or like mainly Leviticus and Deuteronomy, talk about mediums in a disparaging way, but they also are the same books that say, if you have a disobedient son, you should take him to a neighboring town to be stoned to death. And they also say that slavery is an acceptable practice, and you can will your slaves to your kids, and all adulterers should be stoned to death. So you're talking about basically traditional things from a different era of time, when people had different perspective. I don't personally view that as the word of God. I can't see how those kinds of things could be viewed as the product of a loving God. In the New Testament and other parts of the Old Testament, there are more favorable things said, and a lot of things that Jesus talks about and does are in fact mediumship. The story of the Transfiguration, in which he talks to two deceased people, Moses and Elijah, in plain view of his disciples, is mediumship. When he talks to a woman at a well in the Gospel of John, talking about her past and using clairvoyance, that's psychic phenomena. So, and in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, the Apostle Paul lists the gifts of the Spirit as a positive thing to be developed and nurtured. And they're pretty much all these things: prophecy, discerning of spirits, on and on and on. So the thing is, I think people that look at as the Bible as just one thing and it's dropped down from heaven intact, really don't know the history of the book. It's 66 different books, at least the Protestant version of it, written by many different authors over areas, over a wide era of time, from different perspectives, and assembled. And really, the books that ended up in it were decided on in this, I think it was the 4th century, by the church leaders of the day. So I guess my point here is, I just use this quote that's attributed to Jesus, where it says, "A bad tree cannot bear good fruit." And in my mind, it's good fruit if a medium is able to share a connection with a parent that's healing and helps them over a hump. Maybe they were considering taking their own life, or they were just very despondent and sitting in a corner, and they get a message like that that helps them. That's good fruit. So that's kind of like the punchline that I probably said to them that day.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I know that Irene had 2 questions that she wanted to ask you, so I want to make sure that she gets her questions in.
Hey, Mark, I was just wondering if anyone else in the family has shown any psychic ability like your dad. Did Brandon or your other son, or any of, I don't know if you have nephews or cousins?
So really, the people that research this, like Julie Beischel, they all pretty much know that it runs in family lines. It's very common. And if I go back through my dad's lineage, even before him, he had his grandmother on his father's side read tea leaves. His mother became a trance medium, like Suzanne Giesman. So he had that in his lineage. And then even on, and his mom was on the other side. So he had it from both sides. I have it to some degree. I mean, I don't really use it or try and say I'm a medium or whatever, but I've experimented with it successfully on a number of occasions and had spontaneous things happen. My son Steven seems to be pretty psychic. He gets stuff quite often. One of the cases with him that was kind of interesting, two couple in Phoenix that are his good friends were going to have a baby. And so Gary, who is the husband, said, well, okay, what's the baby's name going to be? And I'm trying to think of what it is, but it's a very unusual name. So, and Stephen just blurted it out, and it turned to be out to be accurate. So, I've seen it with him. He's used it for guidance and and making decisions sometimes that have proven effective and helpful. As far as Brandon, I don't know. He made it 18 years. It's hard to say. I do remember 2 times, and this may have been more my dad, but I saw him interact with my dad in an unusual way. Like there was an unspoken language there, what it made me wonder, like, what's going on here? Does my dad know something that I don't know? Well, later I figured my dad knew that Brandon probably was going to pass, and he couldn't share that with me, or it would have been devastating. I would have wasted all these years, worrying about it, trying to prevent it. But yeah, it does run in family lines. And I'll share one story of myself that's probably the most remarkable I've had. It was for a 3-year stint. I was going to a church in San Francisco called the Golden Gate Spiritualist Church to give a talk. And each time I would take Tina Powers and I would do a talk, and she would give readings to the congregation. This church was founded in 1924 by a woman named Florence Becker, who by all accounts was very similar to my father in her abilities. She passed away in, I think, 1970. So Tina was pestering me saying, Mark, I think you're going to get a message. Will you share it with the congregation? I'm like, well, if I get something, sure, I will. And so she kept bugging me about this all the way up to the day that we were to go to the church. We're actually walking in the church, and she's like, Mark, do you promise to share any messages you might get? I'm like, yes, Tina. So we go in, I have about a half hour to kill. So I go in the healing room, sit on the bench to the piano or organ, close my eyes to try and just quietly meditate and get myself prepared to do it. Let's just see if anything comes to me. While I'm sitting there, a name floats in, Max. It wasn't a name that I saw. I didn't hear it. It just came like an idea would come, a thought would pop in, Max, and then immediately Maxine. And I thought, huh, that's interesting. Maybe it's Maxine, not Max. Anyhow, my turn came. I gave my talk, and at the end, I just said, Tina made me promise if I got anything that I'd share it. So I just have to ask if the names Max or Maxine mean anything to anyone here. And the pastor of the church's jaw drops, and he's like, well, Max and Maxines were twins born to the church founder, Florence Becker. They were delivered stillborn and grew up in spirit. He goes, I think we know who is here right now. And then afterward, he took me upstairs. He says, I want to show you something. And he showed me a painting that I think was done by Florence Becker, the church founder. It was a landscape and it had a long winding road. He goes, look at the end of the road. See those two little figures? That's Max and Maxine. So I think that what that told me too was like how subtle these things can be, because I think that's why Tina was prodding me over and over again to promise to say anything that would come through, because she probably knew that was going to happen and that I could have easily dismissed it as just, I just imagine those names. But here I have two names that are unusual, that are highly specific. So anyhow, I thought that was kind of cool. But with me, it's been sporadic. It's not something I've really worked at or tried to do, on a regular basis. Maybe someday, we'll see.
Do you still feel like you get messages from your dad? And do you think your dad helps you at all in your mediumship certification?
I think where it's helped me more is like in writing. So sometimes I just feel inspired. One thing that I found really interesting was when I discovered his book before I had it published. Now I'll tell this story too, because it's kind of interesting. I had a reading with Alison Dubois back in 2004 in August. 2 weeks before that reading, a man who knew my dad gave me a box. I opened the box and it's a manuscript, 8.5 by 11 typed pages, says Your Psychic Potential, A Guide to Psychic Development by Richard Ireland, 1973. I'm like, where'd you get this? And he says, well, it was your dad's manuscript. He gave it to me before he passed away because you were out of state at the time. I said, well, that's been 12 years. Why are you giving this to me now? He says, I just feel like I'm supposed to. 2 weeks later, I have the reading with Alison Dubois, and she's like, well, I have your dad here, and he showed me a book, but I think it's his book. However, he's handing it to you to take forward. Does that make sense to you? And I'm like, yeah, I think I get it. So anyhow, that's how that book came in my possession. And I forgot your question because I got off track. That was a lead in to answering your question.
Yeah, no, it was just if you said that your dad, you feel, guides you when you're writing. I asked if he
Okay.
communicates with you.
Yeah, so what this was I was actually writing a forward to the book, and I'd already written pretty much everything. Deborah Martin wanted to meet with me, another medium. She says, your dad's come to me and he wants to make sure that the right things are said for anyone who takes this book on. So she reviewed it and she felt comfortable. And basically I wrote down something to the effect that, this is a sacred gift. It's to be taken seriously, not to be used for the wrong purposes, not to be used for your ego, but to serve other people. So I wrote all this stuff down. And when I wrote it, it just kind of flowed. Then I was going through some of my dad's papers that I pulled out. I had all these boxes and manila envelopes, and I found a paper called To the Would-Be Medium. And I read that, and the content in that was almost identical to what I had already written down. So that told me that, okay, he's helping me with this stuff, And like with the music, I feel like Brandon's helped me with a couple of songs that I've composed and put together too. So for me, it seems like, and he always said, my dad always said that like there's a link between these creative things like art and music and psychic gifts and that kind of thing. So I found that to be true with me. Would I still be effective if I sat down and tried to meditate and do a test reading for somebody? I don't know. I'd have to try it. It's been a long time. It's not really been a focus of mine right now. I think it's a big responsibility. I think that's one reason I've not really chosen to go down that path. People in grief are fragile. So, and again, we'll talk about my mediumship certification program later, maybe, but that's part of the reason I have that program, is to make sure that I have vetted sources. Not that you can ever guarantee a good reading, but it increases the odds of having one.
Thanks. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Sure.
Yes, and yes, we definitely would love to speak about the mediumship certification program because it's a huge part of helping parents heal. But there are a few questions in the chat box I'd love to ask you. Sherry is asking, HPH feels divinely driven. Many of us have opened up spiritually to a greater reality. How has your own unfolding developed since embarking on this journey with Elizabeth and others? So maybe you could just tell about your own journey, Mark.
Well, I think I kind of touched on that. I think part of it was, at the time before Brandon passed, I was totally focused on my job and career and worldly achievement and recognition and all that kind of stuff. And I think it kind of pushed me down this other path to really look at what's most important in life, not just for myself, but overall. How can I serve other people? How can I heal myself? How can my family heal? What can we do going forward? But I've just been blessed with so many various forms of unbelievable validations and things, connections, that I almost feel guilty, like I've had way more than my share. But yet those things gave me the confidence to be able to share openly and step out of that world that I was in, and not be shy about sharing these kinds of things that people in the mainstream world might view as woo woo or out there or whatever. I think there's actually a benefit to my background of being in business and learning to communicate and be a critical thinker and all that, because I can be taken seriously, when I talk about these things or write about them, which I think is very helpful to the field. And I know a lot of the mediums that I've worked with and have been certified are very grateful that I've written these books that support their work, and also put together a program that they could say, hey, I went through this process and I passed. So, it gives them a sense of recognition of the validity of the work that they do.
That's really well said. And I just wanted to say that it was interesting because Lynn Holohan was on a meeting with us on Tuesday, I believe it was. And she was talking, no, it was last Thursday. She was talking about her start with Helping Parents Heal, and that you introduced us. And then we were at a restaurant together, and I believe Doris was there as well, at Gordon Biersch. And all of us were laughing and having such a great time. And I think that everybody in the restaurant was wondering, who are those people? Why are they having so much fun? And waiters were saying, well, they're parents who have children who have passed. And it really was an amazing thing to be able to come together with you and other people who understood that obviously our children's passing is not the end for them, that they are happy, healthy, and whole. And as your beautiful wife, Susie, always says, and we're still in school. And so that was something that was incredibly helpful for me in the beginning. I felt exactly the same way. And by the way, when Suzanne brought the book to me, I had never met her before. So it was the first meeting for me. So
Oh, wow. Well, you only got that reading that was through a third party before that, or whatever.
it
Yeah.
was through the yoga studio, yes, but being able to meet her in person and get this book. And as I say in this interview, I opened it up to show that you had written something to me back in 2010. It was dated in 2010, which is pretty amazing. So anyway, I also wanted to ask you if your book is on Audible, because people are asking that right now.
Not yet. I'm hopeful that I can get audiobooks published for both Soul Shift and Persistence as a Soul. But right now, I have to check with my publisher on that. They probably will do that at a certain point if sales reach a certain level. So if I get to that level, then hopefully it'll go down that path. Otherwise, I would probably have to ask them if I could do it on my own and if they'd give me permission to do that. But tagging on the last thing you said, I was just going to say, much like that day, that meeting at Gordon Biersch where everyone's happy, our conference was the same way, where that hotel was afraid of having our group because they thought it was going to be a real downer. And at the end, they said, you're the best group we ever had. They couldn't believe how great we were. And I think, getting all the people together, building camaraderie, meeting other people who were in the same situation, but also having all those great presenters and the interaction and the evidence that was there. And a lot of the women bringing their husbands or their partners and the men shy away from this oftentimes. They're locked away, they won't show their emotions, and to get them there and to actually experience this was a big, big deal. So I just wanted to throw that into, and I'll let you go on to the next question.
Oh, yes, you're exactly right. And I'm thrilled because at this conference, we're hoping to give out a copy of the Helping Fathers Heal new book that's going to be coming out, that's specifically about the way that these fathers have healed, which is different than the way that moms have healed, obviously. But thank you for bringing that up. And I just wanted to also say that Linda is asking about karma and how karma could, what she might have done in a prior life to create the situation that she would have had a child pass in this life. I know that you have a very good way of explaining this. I'd like to explain it myself as well, but maybe you could just address that very quickly so that we can reassure her that it's nothing that she did wrong.
Yeah, again, this is a theory. This is perspective. I'm not saying this is fact, but I think I tend to believe in reincarnation. I think there's a lot of evidence for it. And I think really what it's about is refining our souls, because it's like, who's going to learn everything they can learn, and who's going to go through all pertinent experiences in one life to be able to become completely loving and understanding, and to be the ultimate person you could be. I think it requires more than one. As far as karma, I've heard different views about it. One might think of like a sowing and reaping, or every action gets an equal and opposite reaction. I thought of it that way in the past, but I think it's more like karma isn't just like a payback for something. I think it's more like, okay, these things that happen in your life, maybe there's a deficiency or something where you need to learn something or experience something to refine you, is maybe more like how I would view karma. I don't know. I mean, maybe somebody that you knew in a prior life had a child pass, and maybe they needed more support from you. So now maybe you need more support from them. I don't know. I can't really answer that part of it. I would not say that the person deserved that. I would not say that at all. I
Well,
think
and
in my case, I think this
oh,
laid a track for me to do work I was supposed to do. And maybe I'd agreed to this before I ever got here, and that it made me a better person. It made me a more compassionate person, so I think that's the truth for a lot of us, maybe it made us think differently and have a more fulfilling life. As difficult as it was, as challenging as something like that is, definitely not the same person I was before.
exactly. So yes, if you kind of take those ideas of Rob Schwartz and soul plans, which was something that was very difficult for me to believe in the very beginning, took me several years to believe that I might have already planned this before I was born, to be able to learn something important in this life, then it has nothing to do with something that you've done in a past life, but everything to do with the fact that you're wanting to learn more while you're here. And that means that you're a very strong soul that has signed up for something like this. So we're all very strong souls. We're all wanting to be able to live this life to learn something very important, which I think you're right, is all about compassion, is all about love. And that this journey that we're living right now here on Earth, which is the hardest place to be in the whole universe, is all about love.
Yeah,
So thank
we
you
do
for
we have bumps in the road along the way, some more severe than others, that jar us into a new path, and maybe down a path we wouldn't have considered going before. But in the end, hopefully we're better for it.
Exactly. That's very well said. And we have some other questions. I'm just looking, I think we still have time for the certification process. Sherry is asking, do you feel our kids continue to expand their soul growth by helping with ours? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this world is one where there's more to be gained. From what I understand, it's harder to grow a lot on the other side, just because there aren't all the challenges that really refine us or make us be more compassionate or to make these choices in life. I think it's like if you didn't have hunger, you didn't have desire, you didn't need shelter, all these kinds of things. I think it's a little bit different, but I think you can grow and refine, and I think they're doing good work to help us more than just their own growth. I think it does grow them too, but I think it's helping, they're helping us more than we're helping them, I guess I would say. At least that's my view of it.
I think they're also helping each other to learn how to connect with us. So I think that there's a big group of them all working together to teach each other how to communicate with their parents. And I think that that's one of the things that's very important to them, to make sure that we understand that they are happy, healthy, and whole, as Susie always says. Let's see. Christy is saying, tell us about your relationship with your son, Brandon. Does he communicate with you?
Yeah, I'd say, in the early stages, there was a lot more of it more frequently, but we needed it more then. And it was, I mean, I can't even list them all here. They're in the books, but we've had not only so many from mediums, but like 6 months after Brandon passed, my wife Susie's sitting at the foot of our bed and she feels him, feels his presence, and sees him as a shadow figure out of her peripheral vision. And then the very next day, we get a call from a friend, totally unaware of her situation. And he was in his recording studio using Brandon's bass guitar, which is behind me in the middle of that blue one, because he didn't have one. And he told Susie, hey, while I was in there recording the song, I felt another presence in there. I saw a shadow figure out of my peripheral vision. I saw flashes of white light. And then after that kept going on, he felt like it was Brandon, and he said, Brandon, what do you want from me? And he felt guided then to redo lyrics in the bass line of the song he was working on that became a song called The Other Side, which he said, this is the best song I've ever written, but I didn't write it. So, I mean, the mere fact of Susie having that situation and then James having the exact same thing the day later was just crazy. I mean, it was just so compelling. But I've had so many other experiences too along the way. I just am thrilled with
Well,
them. Lately, I would say not as often,
could you
but
possibly just say what happened when Stephen got married? Because I think that that was a beautiful story with Molly Morningstar, that what happened in terms of.
yeah, that was cool too. So my son was married in 2014 in May in France in the Loire Valley. And before the wedding, in January, Molly was visiting us at our home in Scottsdale at the time. And she said, well, since you guys are putting me up here, I want to give you a reading. And so she started giving me validation about my mom who had passed and things that were kind of amusing and I knew to be true. And then she switched gears and she says, well, Brandon's here and he wants Stephen to know that he's the real best man and someone else can stand in for him, but he's the real best man. Then she went on to say, I think at Stephen's wedding, Stephen's going to wear like a little memento. I think, and I think it'll have a picture of Brandon in it. I think Stephen will wear a nice suit. It won't be a tuxedo, but a nice suit, and he'll have this memento with a picture of Brandon. So about 2 hours, and she says, and remember 2 p.m. on the wedding day. So a couple hours before the wedding, one of the groomsmen comes up to me and goes, hey, Mark, Liz couldn't make the trip here to France, but she wanted you to have this for you and the groomsmen and Stephen. I opened the box up and it's a bunch of these memento photos of Brandon that you clip onto your suit. So we all wore those. And it was at 2 p.m. that day that Susie learned of this. So that was pretty cool. So, I've had some extraordinary things like that. And I'm grateful for those. I just don't feel like I need him as much. I would say that I do think about him at times and connect with him in terms of feeling his energy kind of flow through me like this electrical charge. And then I know so many mediums, they're always like throwing stuff at me. Like I met Farrah Gibson a few months ago and I'd not really spent any time with her one-on-one, but I was talking to her about Brandon's bass guitar. And she goes, oh, he's here. And she says, well, he says his new one had an extra string. I'm like, well, that's true because that one there, which is his first, had 4 strings. But 3 months before he passed, it was his 18th birthday, and he wanted a 5-string bass guitar, and that's what we bought him for his 18th birthday. So that's a pretty obscure fact. And then she went on to say, and he shows me you with a guitar taking all the strings off. Like, you're taking all the strings off. I don't know if you're restringing a guitar. Well, 2 days prior to that, I'd been in Prescott visiting a friend who, she was walking me around downtown. We went on a hike, and then she took me into a music store. Then she asked the employee there, hey, can you restring guitars? I have this old Martin guitar somebody gave me or I bought cheaply. He says, oh, sure. And I said, you don't need to do that. I'll restring it for you. So I bought her a set of strings, and then I went back and restrung the guitar for her. So Farrah got that, you know. So I get that kind of stuff. I'm fortunate to know so many mediums, so they're always giving me stuff like that, unsolicited.
You are very fortunate to know so many mediums, that's for sure. I would love for you to have time to speak about your certification process, because maybe you could tell everyone what these mediums have to go through to be able to be certified by you, which is a fairly strenuous process, but it's free of charge.
Yeah. So I've been doing this for almost 10 years. I started in 2014 in the spring. And really what drove it was back after Soul Shift came out, I started getting barraged by people asking for recommended mediums. And I knew at the time a half dozen of them, but most of them were like celebrity mediums and maybe with long wait lists and maybe higher prices than some folks wanted to pay. So I thought, you know, there have to be other people with these abilities that are lesser known, that don't have long waits and don't charge a lot. And that was my idea going into it. Then I reached out to 2 people in the research field that I knew, Dr. Emily Williams Kelly at the University of Virginia and Tricia Robertson with the Scottish Society of Psychical Research, to kind of compile a methodology to do the testing. And what I ended up doing, and I've actually refined this about 3 times now, maybe 4 times, to up the bar even more, because I want to make sure I get the very best people in there, is anyone applying for certification has to go through 5 blinded readings done on Zoom. So no video. They don't know who they're reading for until it starts, and they're only given the first name. They could go for maybe 10 minutes and just get whatever they get. And then after that, the sitter is allowed to ask to connect with a specific person by first name only. And then the reading goes on. The reading's recorded, and it's transcribed then into basically taking paragraph form into individual statements that can be graded. So the sitter then grades the reading, taking each statement, saying it's either correct, incorrect, or indeterminable. Indeterminable would be like a future prediction that they don't know, or maybe a piece of information pertaining to someone the sitter can't find or doesn't know where they live or whatever. Then we put all that together, and then the sitter can also award bonus points for very specific hits. So let's just hypothetically say if the medium was to say, okay, I believe you have a son who passed, I'm getting an A name, and he's showing me pizza. Well, let's say the sitter says, okay, yeah, I did have a son pass, that's correct. His name was Aaron, so that's an A name, that's correct. And that probably warrants a bonus. I'll give you a 2-point bonus. So we have a 2-point and 5-point. 5 points even more valuable. And then say she brought up pizza. Well, heck, that was his favorite food. I'll give you 2 points for that. Now let's say that the medium instead said, okay, I believe I have a son who passed. Name is Aaron, and he's showing me pizza with pepperoni and green olives. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I did have a son pass. His name was Aaron. So correct plus 5-point bonus. And that exact type of pizza was his favorite. So I'm going to give you a 5-point bonus for that too. Now, those are optimal results, but that's kind of how it works. We put all that together. Then we determine the percent of accuracy, comparing the correct versus incorrect statements. And then we push the indeterminables to the side unless there's too many of them. We only allow a maximum 33% indeterminable, because if it's higher than that, that's not really a good reading. It's too vague and not directed enough. So anything over 33% we count as incorrect. And so today I have 41 people who have passed this over a 10-year span. Some have scored, you have to score at least 65% accurate and 75 total points to pass. That's on the average of the 5. Now keep in mind 65% is equal to 65 points. So even if you got 65% accurate, you'd still need 10 bonus points to get to 75. Or you could be 75% accurate and you'd pass. So I've had probably, I'd say 8 to 10 of the people have been in the 90s, mid to high 90s, low to high 90 range. So we got some very good people there. Some people barely passed, but everyone who's passed met those standards. And to say 41 people, that's about 4 per year over a 10-year period. So it's done its job. We found people who are good at that.
What is the percentage of the people who actually try to pass this as opposed to the people who do pass it?
You know, in the beginning, I was getting really the cream of the crop. It was higher, but it's kind of diminished. And more recently, I would only say like 15% maybe are passing. We're getting a lot of people. We have a long wait list, both of mediums and sitters, but it's a low percentage. It's a demanding thing. I mean, even some of the people that do it, that fail, they probably have mediumship ability, some of them, but it's just not enough under those strict conditions to be able to function at their best. I think some of them maybe worry too much about results. They can't relax enough, whereas in a normal reading, they would relax. But the thing is, the way I view it is, even though it may not be completely fair to them, I'm more concerned about the people on the other end to make sure they're getting somebody who's the very best. So I figure if they can go through that gauntlet and pass, then, you know, they're going to be the type of folks that we want to feature. And that's why, you know, you have me screen people that are added to the provider list for HPH. And I do have others in addition to that who aren't connected to HPH, but everybody who's coming on as a new provider, they have to go through that.
Yes, and we're very, very grateful for that process. And not only that, I just wanted to also mention that I think that it's possible if someone is not able to pass your certification process to try again in a certain time period. Is that right?
They have to wait a year. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's also nice because it does give someone another chance if they weren't able to
Yeah.
pass.
And they'll have a better idea what it's like the second time around.
Yeah, and I really wanted to be able to allow people to know where to see videos of your dad, because we're talking about this book that, you know, The Persistence of the Soul. Some of them are just incredible. He is a billet reader. Maybe you could just explain what that means and then tell people where they can see him in action.
Sure. So first off, all the stuff that I have you can go a one-stop shop to my website because I have a link to Helping Parents Heal. I have a link to the Certified Medium website. I have a link to my dad's videos. I have all my other media and my books and all are on markirelandauthor.com. Mark with a K, Ireland like the country, author, markirelandauthor.com. All of those links are there so you could see my dad's videos if you go there. So his common psychic demonstration was blindfold billet. Now, he would take 10 strips of Johnson & Johnson medical tape, which is opaque and very, very sticky, put that over his eyes, tear it in strips, would cover his eyes, then 3 black opaque blindfolds over that, and then more tape over that, just to, you know, answer any skeptics who would say that he could see in some way. And he'd even take the tape and put it down over the blindfolds down below his cheek, so you couldn't accuse him of peeking down because it's sealed off. Anyhow, it was really more for effect because, you know, you couldn't, even if somebody could read these billets, they wouldn't be able to give the answers that he did because he would go off far in addition to questions that were written down onto other things and cover all kinds of stuff for people. Just like I think Irene wanted me to tell the story about Susie and I. So when I was 19 years old, when I first met Susie, who's my wife now, many, many years ago, I showed up to pick her up for a date and I hadn't made good plans. I'm like, do you want to go to a movie? Do you want to go to a disco? Do you want to go see my dad's psychic demonstration? She goes, oh, let's do that. So we go there. I'm running late. I'm a 19-year-old kid. We show up. My dad's already started, completely blindfolded, giving people messages. So I said to Susie, why don't you write a question down? She goes, what do I write? And I said, well, write any question about the future. So she wrote, will my mom ever get married? So I took it from her, handed it to an attendant who took it up there and put it into my dad's basket. And so her mom at the time had been divorced a number of years from her dad, but she was dating a guy, but she'd been very non-committal. He wanted to get married, but she was being non-committal. So Susie's question goes up. Finally, my dad gets it. And he says, Susie soup sat. What was Susie's sight? And she goes, here. He goes, well, think you've asked me a question about your mother and if your mother will be getting married. Well, I don't know about your mother, my dear, but you've made your choice of men and he's with you here tonight. And I spoke up and said, Dad, this is Mark. Susie's my date. He goes, oh my gosh, I just married off my own son. And then it was about a year and a half later we were married. So, and that was our second date. So that was pretty early.
Love that story.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, and what a great way to end this. If you have any parting words that you'd like to say, please do so. We have about 1 minute longer. So did you want to just say anything else about your book, or we have your website in the chat box? Anything else that you'd like to say?
Just that I know everybody on here has been through a hard time. And sometimes we question, if we have the strength to go on, or, is it all really worth it? And I think it is, I would just say, hang in there. If you're in a tough spot, hang in there, work it through, see it through, because we're here for a reason. We're here for a purpose. All of us have a path and a purpose, and we need to see that through. There's no shortcuts, but the dividends that are there for us in the long run, as we leave this life, make it worth it. We're here for a purpose. It's actually a privilege to be here, as hard as it is. So we have to take advantage of that. So I would just say, hang in there, see it through. We're here to support you all. We all love each other, and that's what's made this organization so successful and special.
Thank you. That's absolutely beautiful and a perfect way to end the meeting. And we always ask everyone to unmute and say thank you. I'd like for Doris to just unmute first and just say thank you to Doris first. We are so grateful to you to have gotten all of that paperwork together to become a nonprofit in the beginning, which was a long time ago. But maybe you want to just say something to Mark before we end?
Well, I think you all know, I don't know, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I just want you to all know that I love you to the ends of the end. You're great. And I do remember those early days, and I am so privileged to have been there, because it saved me. And you're all everybody that on here is wonderful, but for sure, I'm so proud of this organization, and it's perfect.
It's mind-blowing to see what it's become when you think back to that first meeting, huh?
I remember where we pulled $44 from all of our wallets to open a bank account.
That's right, yeah. And that first meeting, a lot of the people that attended that became board members too,
Yes,
so those
yeah.
early people that were there later became board members, and
That's
kind of
true.
the formation of what is now this massive organization.
Well, we are just
It's wonderful.
And thank you for being on here, Doris. And thank you for being on here, Lisa, as well as Galen, I see, who's an affiliate leader as well in Carmel, as well as Sherry, who is a caring listener, as well as everyone who's
Anna's here, Barb is here. Yeah.
Anna's here too, yes,
Yeah.
as well as Barb. Barb down there too. Yes, thank you for being on here, and thank you all for being on here. Thank you for being a part of Helping Parents Heal. And if you'd like to unmute and say thank you to Mark and good evening, then you're welcome to do so.
Thanks,
Thank
Mark.
you, Mark,
Great
and
night.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Oh,
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Mark. Thank you,
Thank
Irene.
you. Take care.
Yes,
Have a good night,
thank you.
everybody.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.